Hello, ninth graders. Okay, so this video I am reading aloud the article that's been assigned for this week for those of you that like or need that support of hearing it read aloud. However, as I've mentioned before, if you are going to choose to use this resource, this read aloud, my expectation is still that you are reading along as I am reading and not simply just listening. To take effective notes and to really thoroughly grasp the information that you're given, you're going to need to interact with this audio just as you would if you were reading it independently. So make sure that you are pausing and reflecting and responding in just the same way as you would if you were reading independently. Okay, so the title of this article is How White Flight Segregated American Cities and Suburbs. This was written by John Gorey and published in Apartment Therapy magazine on August 15th, 2020. White flight refers to a mass exodus, meaning a mass movement from one place to another, of white people retreating from an increasingly diverse setting, such as, most notably, the mid-20th century migration of white households from cities to the suburbs as more people of color moved into American urban neighborhoods. Seeking to flee the oppression and terror of the Jim Crow South and to pursue new economic opportunities in more industrialized areas, millions of Black Southerners migrated to northern and western U.S. cities from 1940 to 1970 in the second half of the Great Migration. And when cities integrated, whites immigrated, meaning when cities became more diverse, white people left those cities. Princeton economics professor Leah Bustan found that for every Black resident who moved into a northern or western city from 1940 to 1970, 2 white residents left for the suburbs, which, non-coincidentally, were effectively off limits to Black homebuyers who were thwarted by realtors, mortgage lenders, and racist obstacles. Remember those covenants we learned about last week. Bustan contends some white flight was motivated by as much by economics as by racism. There was a booming post-war economy. Newly prosperous households could afford cars and bigger, newer homes, and the government was investing in highways that made a car commuting easier. And cities were already so segregated, she argues, that some white households were leaving all-white urban neighborhoods for all-white suburban ones. But even economic reasons for white flight were underpinned by racism. The Federal Housing Authority's lending guidelines were explicitly racist, instructing banks not to write mortgages in red-line neighborhoods or areas with Black residents that were deemed undesirable. The neighborhoods were literally outlined in red maps, hence the term. The FHA also subsidized the construction of entire suburbs, involving 85% of New York area subdivisions built during the 1930s and 40s, with explicit covenants barring developers from selling to Black homebuyers. The popular GI Bill made it possible for millions of World War II veterans to purchase a home, but not Black veterans, because the Veterans Administration adhered to FHA policy on matters of housing, and mid-century urban renewal projects quite intentionally raised or hemmed in communities of color with federally funded highways so white suburbanites could zip into downtown. Perhaps no practice married racism and capitalism with such sickening synergy as blockbusting. Speculative realtors would sell one home in an all-white neighborhood to a Black family, then approach the other white homeowners on the block and stoke racial fears, warning them to sell quickly and at a discount before more Black families moved in and properties' values dropped. As more white homeowners fled to the suburbs, the remaining ones agreed to sell their homes at deeper discounts, fearful of falling prices. Then the speculator would resell the homes to Black families at an exorbitant markup of 80 to 100% or more. A devil's bargain plenty of Black families accepted, having been previously shut out of the same neighborhood or indeed any homeownership opportunity whatsoever. In 1950, Chicago was 86% white, with more than 3 million white residents. By 1980, the city's Black population had more than doubled, from about 492,000 to 1.2 million. At the same time, more than 1.5 million Chicagoans had moved out. Former First Lady Michelle Obama told an audience last year how she witnessed white flight firsthand growing up in Chicago. As we moved in, white folks moved out because they were afraid of what our families represented, she said. The same phenomenon occurred across the country. In 1950, Boston was about 95% white. By 1980, the city's Black population had more than tripled from 40,000 to 126,000, while the white population had nearly halved from 759,000 to 394,000. Oakland was 85% white in 1950, with 329,000 white residents and 47,000 Black residents. In 30 years, the Black population nearly quadrupled to 159,000, outnumbering the 130,000 whites who remained. White immigrants fled cities at this time too, especially since they were viewed more culturally white, as they worked to assimilate. They distanced themselves from Black Americans physically and culturally, reinforcing the idea that becoming American meant becoming anti-Black. White flight wasn't confined to northern or western cities, though. In his book, White Flight, Atlanta and the Making of Modern Conservatism, Princeton history professor Kevin Cruz chronicles what he calls a suburban succession, as whites around the country isolated themselves in white suburbs under a barely veiled cloak of freedom of association. Nor is white flight merely a remnant of the past. As our suburbs have grown more diverse, some white residents segregate themselves in gated communities or move to farther flung exurbs. Affluent white towns effectively block the types of housing developments that could encourage a greater diversity of residents through exclusionary zoning practices like the banning of most multifamily housing, these are like apartments, or requiring a 1-acre minimum lot size. White flight drains resources from communities of color, particularly Black and Latinx students, Wilson says. Green tends to follow white, meaning money will go where the white families go, she says. Schools with fewer white students often have a harder time attracting high-quality teachers. They are less likely to have sufficient money per pupil. They miss out on the intangible benefits that a racially and economically diverse student body brings.